Hello and welcome to this AlbaCon 2020 interview video. I am Oliver Peltier, one of the organisers of AlbaCon, which is an online charity role-playing convention. The convention is being held on the 3rd and 4th of October 2020, with all money going to It's Good to Give, who provide amazing support to young cancer patients and their families. To find out more, go to www.albacon.co.uk. Today, we're talking about RPG publishing, and I am joined by some amazing people. And so I'd like to introduce Brian Terrell.
Hello.
Then Kat Tobin from Pelgrane Press.
Hello.
Stephen Hart from The Grinning Frog.
Hello.
And Martin Hughes from M3H Publishing.
Well,
It's like Brian Terrell. Brian Terrell's from Dungeons on the Dime, which I forgot to mention, so apologies. So let's talk about RPG publishing, specifically looking at the process of creating RPG products, whether they be physical or digital. So would people like to talk about how they got into it, first of all?
Pretty cool with that, yeah.
Okay, so Brian, tell us about a little bit about yourself, please, and how you got into it.
So I'm Brian. I'm quite young for some of the people I've met working in role-playing publishing end of things. I did an illustration degree when I was 18 to when I was 21. And then for 2 years afterwards, I worked full-time in retail while trying to do as much or any freelance work as I could. But repeatedly, I found that that no one would take my portfolios, that I would get interviews, but I wouldn't get anywhere, that I'd get a lot of like, oh, this is nice, but we'll try you next year as a vibe for the work that I was doing. And so ultimately, after about 2.5 years of that, essentially working 2 jobs of like full-time retail to pay the bills and then full-time trying to do passion projects and not going anywhere, I decided that I was just going to set up my own publishing imprint and then just hire all my friends. And that's how Dungeons on a Dime started. The concept being that it could be role-playing stuff, but it would be for cheap because so much role-playing stuff out there at the time. I mean, if you look at Wizards of the Coast, like a player's handbook runs 30, 40 quid in the UK, and I wanted to make stuff that was much cheaper and more accessible. So my entry into publishing was quite brute force. It was just, I'm making a lot of stuff and I hope people like it and putting it out there. And specifically working at the message of working with people who didn't have big experience in publishing. So working with illustrators for their first publishing job and working with like small-time editors and small-time writers and trying to do as much as cheaply as possible.
Thank you, Brian. That's brilliant. Would Kat like to say anything, please? You're muted, I'm afraid.
Yep, I'm just unmuting myself now. So I come from the convention organizing side of things. So I got into RPG convention organizing back in university. And then I moved to Scotland in 2002. And while I was living in Edinburgh, I got involved with Contested Ground Studios, who published A State. And I helped out in different kind of capacities with them for a couple of years. And I've always really enjoyed, I guess, the production side of the role-playing industry, so producing events and then helping to produce books. And I ran a convention called Dragon Meet in London in 2011 and 2012, I think. And while I was involved in running that, I met Simon Rogers, who at the time was the co-owner and managing director of Pelgrane Press. And he actually he ended up having a vacancy in the company. A couple of months later, he remembered having met me at Dragon Meet and he sent me through the job description. So I applied for that. I went through the interview process and got the job there. And then kind of I learned basically, I came from and accounting and financial management background. So I very much learned the kind of the more publishing aspect, so like art direction and layout and using specialist like Adobe software and stuff like that. Very much learned all of that on the job, but the kind of the bulk of my role really was producing books. So yeah, and then I've been the co-owner of Pelgrane Press for the last, I want to say, 4 years now. And Simon's taken a sabbatical at the moment, so I'm pretty much running it by myself right now. So as a sole managing director.
Thank you very much, Kat. Stephen, please.
Hi. Well, I've been role playing since I was 11. So let's go back to 1981. So it puts a bit of an age to it. I had a successful career in executive recruitment, principally as a recruitment trainer and coach. But in the last 3 years, I have to say I was loving it less and less, and quite interested in transitioning to something that was more creative. My very first job had been in the design studio. I went to art college, and I missed that creative, world. Recruitment is many things, but creative it is not. So I was self-publishing small supplements as the Grinning Frog whilst working full time. Then comes along an job opportunity back in the design world, coincidentally, with the first company I'd ever been employed with. I took that up, joined the company, and then COVID hit. So, as with many people, unfortunately, that resulted in being furloughed, and it was understood that it would also then end in redundancy. So from May 2020, publishing RPGs became my main way of making an income, bread and butter, quite frankly. So since then, I've run 4 successful Kickstarters, the 4th of which is happening at the moment. And I am doing a lot of writing and trying to learn the job very, very quickly.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And last but by no means least, Martin.
Thank you. I'm a similar vintage. I started role-playing in the mid-80s. And I worked in a shop selling all the role-playing games, so I got a lot of experience in sort of playing different systems and getting involved in all of that. I was also at art college. I trained as a painter and as a photographer. And my first experience of graphic design was actually doing character sheets for the role-playing games we would do at the time. Fast forward on a million years, and I've been a graphic designer all of my life. I run a digital design company. Spent the last 10 years publishing magazines, business-to-business magazines, and doing conference design, principally in the music industry. So that's not happening anymore. I was pivoting the business towards digital anyway, and as luck would have it, I went to pick up an old box of games from my mother's last year and found a load of old sort of second edition D&D, and I was going through them and I was looking, I can actually do this now. I can actually sort of put this together, and I have all the skills for that, which was a bit of a revelation. And I got in touch with Guy from Great Games Masters channel, who I'd been watching, and he sort of stirred my interest in role-playing again. And just through chatting, I ended up working on the design for his book. We just sort of kicked around some ideas, and he was like, right, I want you to work on the Kickstarter. Much like Stephen, I'm now looking to it as a source of potential income as well. We've got a couple more projects on the go and moving forward, and it's great to do something you love and have passion about as well, which has been great for me. I mean, not that I didn't love the stuff I was doing before, but this is a special place in my heart for that. So, and that's where I'm at. I'm looking at doing a few projects. We've got 2 or 3 in the wings, but the main one people will see on my Twitter is the Nautical Guide with Guy.
That sounds brilliant. Thank you. That's so that's a brief introduction to all our amazing panelists, and so we can go straight into first topic. How would you decide to make a product? And so you thought of a product you want to make, what are you going to do next? To brainstorm? Have a game jam? Just what's your creative process? Anyone want to answer that first?
I could go first.
Okay.
Go ahead, Stephen.
Oh, okay, thanks. I think for me, it's all about note keeping. You know, I find that inspiration can come at the oddest of times. So I'm a big fan of different notebooks that I have. So, you know, I've got something that I haven't actually produced this yet, but if you can see here, there's a little pen drawing of a dungeon. Now that is going to go to Kickstarter this October, probably. And it's an adventure that I've had the core idea of 2 years ago. I get the idea, I write it down, I like to mull it over. And then I'm lucky that I've got a network of people that I bounce the idea off. And I put forward, okay, I'm thinking of doing this. A, does it sound any good from a gaming perspective? B, what don't you like? And then let's try and tear it down. And then C, is it market worthy? You know, will people actually pay for it? Because I think something you have to consider very strongly is that, you know, we're doing this for an income stream. We have to sell things that are popular, and we have to sell things that, you know, have an audience. Especially if you don't have a brand name behind you, you have to think, okay, what can I put out there that is genuinely created with love and passion, but also has a commercial market? And I think that's an important consideration. And I've come up with ideas that, you know, my sort of brain trust have turned to me and said, no one's going to buy it. It's great, it's creative, it's fantastic, but just keep that in your head for now. So I think, okay, fine, it stays in the notebook, and it's never forgotten. I can always go back to it later. So that's my process.
Brilliant. I think, Brian, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I would agree with that a lot. I like to think of like creative, any kind of work is like a stew pot. You're just putting things in and then checking on it every every hour or so. You just let it simmer for a really long time. So if you think of something really cool, you don't have to make it immediately. You just sort of let it culminate, and maybe it will combine with something else that goes into the pot later. Like if you had that adventure 2 years ago, I'm sure it's gathered more things along the way that have made it even cooler. Mm-hmm. And when you get to making like a product, like a full thing, it starts as a mixture of different things, and you slowly, you make your first draft, and then you walk away from it for a week. You come back later where you've got a fresh mind, you look at it, you refine it, you do that again. I find that I make several whole new edits of like a base text before I even consider having like a proofreader or an editor come in to start helping me refine it. And even then, if it's say like an adventure, then I've played that in different iterations with different groups to try it stylistically with different themes and characters, and I've made changes. I've just got a whole mess of notes that I've worked on. So it's that kind of trying things out, making notes before you go to think of the product. I wouldn't go into it with the mindset of, I'm here to make a book and it's going to be 48 pages and it's going to be exactly this. It's the being open to letting it be flexible and stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's a really, really good point. And another thing that I would add to that is like a fundamental question when you initially come up with the idea of for an RPG. I think that there are a couple of fundamental questions you need to ask yourself. And the first one is, what are you doing it for? Like, what do you want your role with regard to that RPG to be? And the reason that I say that is that will help you determine whether you want to go down the self-publishing route or whether you want to try and pitch it to a potential publisher and have them do all of the, really annoying kind of bureaucratic, production-y, marketing-y, all of that kind of stuff, and let you just, follow your creative muse to wherever she might lead you, So working with an existing publisher versus self-publishing it yourself, I think is the first decision you need to make. And then you also need to look at the system, I think, as well. Like, again, are you going to work within an existing system? Do you want to do, for example, a DM's Guild product or something with community content with an existing system? Do you want to actually try and pitch a publisher on an idea for one of their systems that you have? Or do you want to, again, create your own RPG entirely from scratch? So I think, again, that's another important consideration is how you want to, you know, what the bones and the mechanics and the rules of your RPG are going to be. And then the last question that I would always tell people to ask themselves when they're starting an RPG, and this is more for if you're creating your own RPG from scratch, because most published RPGs will already have an existing structure for this, but it's really important to decide upfront what the characters do in the game, right? That's the most fundamental thing about any RPG is what do the characters do in the game? Like, for example, in our Gumshoe system, the characters investigate mysteries. In D&D, you know, the characters go into dungeons and kill dragons. And then everything, you know, your setting and your rules and everything else should flow back from that fundamental question of what the characters actually do in the game, like that verb that the characters, you know, use to proceed through the game will kind of inform how you design your rules and what your kind of setting will be on top of that.
Thank you. Martin, have you got anything to...
I think it's covered a lot of ground there.
Yes.
It's the only thing I agree with all the points made before. The only thing I would add from my perspective, I've been working with business partners, and the process of actually presenting to someone allows you to clarify your own idea. I mean, if you're somebody like Stephen's used to working in the environment, so he's able to go through it. I got a group of 5 friends who I knew, some of them role played, some of them didn't, and I presented the ideas to them, and I found that the ideas that I was looking at and going, I can't really be bothered to do a presentation for that, weren't a strong idea. And also by the process of presenting, you'll also clarify, as Kat said, you'll start to think about, well, what's the sentence behind this? Where is it going? What's the core idea? And you'll define that. And also you can fall into the habit of telling people ideas, and then you won't have the energy to go and do them. So stop telling people ideas. Have the idea and develop it, as these guys have, and show them a developed idea. That'll stop you getting the emotional payoff before you do the work, so to speak. So,
thank you, thank you all. So you've got the idea. You've just allowed us to gestate and improve, and you're now actually you want to make this now. It's going to happen. So what's involved in actually making this? I know Kat's actually introduced this because it depends on presumably the size of the product, the scale, the writing. What features matter to you most and in the actual process of actually producing it, from the concept, which you've now got the go-ahead to actually make it, to where would you go next, or how would you sequence it? Stephen, you're on mute.
There we go. Much better without that. I was going to say that I think the first thing is to try it out. You take some aspect of it that you particularly are like or resonate with, and put fingers to keyboard. You know, actually try to write a section of it, because sometimes the idea is fine, but when you've actually come down to produce it, it doesn't work for some reason. You know, it just doesn't hang together like you think it should, or actually you find out that your notions behind it are too shallow. There's not enough depth for a full publication. So if you pick the passage that really works for you, put that down. If you suddenly run out after 2 pages of content, you think, oh, that's a lovely 2 pages I've just written, but I've got nothing else to say. You might need to revise this idea. You might need to step back from the brink. But if you produce it, you think, that looks quite nice. It's rough, it's ready, it's not edited, but actually I can see where it will go. I can see how this will transition. I can see if it's a story, for example, if it's an adventure, for example, I very often write a section in the middle. And then I start thinking, what precedes that scene? How will the adventurers get to that point? And then where will they go afterwards? If I can start to come up with the ideas to the left and to the right, so to speak, then I think I can continue. But it's a test for me, because sometimes I start it and I think, actually, I'm not ready. I think it was Brian who said it, that it's like the stew pot. And maybe the ingredients haven't marinated long enough. They need a little bit longer. So you park that one and you go back to a different topic. And also from a person who now has to write to sell to make enough money to keep the lights on, one of the facets of all of this is it takes quite a long time to write some of this content. So you might be faced with actually a task that's too big for the amount of time that you have. You know, I'm going to write something for Halloween. Well, the clock is ticking. So do you actually have enough time? And that, again, that test piece sometimes gives you, actually it's taking me all day to write 2 pages. I just do not have the time for this project right now. This will have to be a longer term one. And then you can pick a different one that you can finish in time.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I'd bounce off of 2 ideas. It's nice to have different projects going at the same time. So if you have a good idea, start the process of slowly chipping into it, slowly letting it develop and putting the ingredients in the pot, but also be going back to other work and seeing how that inspires. And if there's an idea that doesn't necessarily fit in one place, it might fit somewhere else. So it's really good to have lots of projects. And then also, as Kat was saying, about asking the question of what is this game about? Is it about investigating mysteries? Is it about slaying dragons? Have that as your touchstone and use that when you're comparing to what you want the game to do. If you're writing, if it's a system, if you're writing mechanics, is it evoking this feeling? That touchstone, just make sure you're on track. And if you're finding that the core aspect, what you're writing about, is shifting away from that, so if it's an investigation mystery, but now you're writing about making monsters and about where monsters live and the ecologies and all of the sociology behind the monsters, that's cool, that's valid, but it might not be that project. It might morph into its own separate resource, a smaller subset of something else, or you might just have to park it and go back to investigate mysteries. It's good, I find in my experience, to be open to that goalpost shifting. Like if it turns out you actually really want to write a thing about monsters, but you thought it was investigative mystery at the beginning, that's cool. But if it keeps shifting, that indecisiveness can mean the project never really makes it out of draft stage. So shifting it once or twice is okay, but if it shifts too much, try and refine back to what the basic idea of what you were doing is.
Thank you.
I think going back to what Stephen was saying about taking notes, I mean, I think that's phenomenally important, right? Just, mapping out. I think different people work in different ways, right? And some of our writers will outline everything, right? So if they're writing a new RPG, they'll have an outline document that goes through, has a rough overview of how you generate characters, what the setting is like, maybe a starter adventure and, those kind of details in an outline. And then other people will just sit down and start writing, right? And, I think it's very much you find your own way of doing it. But the most important thing is to start doing it, right? Like so many people, it sounds ridiculous, right? But just do the thing, sit down and start writing it, wherever it goes, whatever happens, you're not a writer unless you're writing, right? So, so I think that's like, honestly, that's the biggest piece of advice I would give to anyone is to just sit down and write the thing. And, it might go somewhere, it might not, it might morph, as Brian was saying, but at least you're writing the thing. Every word that you write contributes to your skill and talent as a writer. So just sit down and do the thing.
And I'd add on to that quickly that Rome isn't built in a day. Don't worry about graphic design. Don't worry about artwork. Don't worry about anything other than what you want to be creating and what is in your wheelhouse. Because if you think that you need to make like the player's handbook page by page, it's never going to happen. Mm-hmm. Start with the text. Start with however bad you might think it is. It's probably much better than you imagine, and just keep going. But yeah. Yeah,
and there's a blend as well, I think, of like RPGs are really different from a writing perspective to other, say, to works of fiction or whatever, because what you're actually trying to do 2 completely radically different things within the one text, right? So you're simultaneously writing a clear, concise instruction manual for how to run a game, but you also have to make it an entertaining read, because nobody's gonna, you don't want it to read like a toaster instruction manual or something, right? It's going to be flavorful, it's going to be fun, it's going to be interesting for people, and often it can be tricky to balance those 2 elements within one text. So yeah, like get writing things, get sketching mechanics, or get writing some flavor text to get your head into the setting. Maybe do an intro quote, write an elevator pitch, I think is always a useful idea. You know, and that kind of thing. Just write stuff until it starts to kind of stick together.
Thank you. I love the idea of the toaster RPG though. That could be quite interactive, kind of a LARP RPG blend.
You have until the toast pops up to finish the scene. I'm seeing cool like food, interactivity, also breakfast like links here.
Yes. And obviously the manual has to be entertaining, which I think it would be if it's called Toast the RPG, but it's random, sorry. Martin, sorry, did you want to add something to that?
No, I think they've covered off a lot of great points about proceeding with your content. How do you eat an elephant one piece at a time and just start eating? Eventually you will look back and you'll go, I've done all of that. And if you're faced with a white sheet of paper, you're never going to get anything done. So yeah, those are the, and yeah, do it in manageable sizes as well. A great man once said, if you think you can fly, try taking off from the ground, don't jump off a building. You know, so that's probably a good bit of advice. Don't start writing a 200-part adventure. Start with the piece, as Stephen said, that you know works really well, and broaden out from there. I'm more interested in the design and the putting it together at the end. So that I'll have more to add later on, I suppose.
That's perfect. It's like every contribution is
Yeah.
vital because everyone thinks differently, and it adds it's all part of neurodiversity and the marvelousness of being a human being. Okay, so we've looked at some of the roles of making a product, and so we've got the size, scale, writing. There's art, editing, layout, graphic design, proofreading, and playtesting. Anyone want to add? We've gone beyond. We've gone beyond building something. So we've got this product.
Well, I have an extra role to add into that list there of like editors and proofreaders. Yes. An extra thing to think about is sensitivity consultants. This isn't going to be something for every project, but if you're working with something that is in a gray zone, that is treading a line intentionally to raise conversation, consider first if you're the right person to be having that conversation and if you have the experience to have that conversation. For example, I'm autistic, so I'm really happy writing about autistic characters. That's something I think I could be doing really well. I've done my research. I know a lot of other autistic people. I could represent that experience in a way that's faithful. I mean, no writing is ever going to represent everybody, but I have that experience to bring it forward. We all have experience from our own lives that we put into our writing. But I wouldn't presume to write about someone who uses a wheelchair or other physical disabilities because I don't have physical disabilities. So if I wanted to make a role-playing game, if I had some cool ideas about that, I might want to work with a disability consultant who does have those experiences, who can check and say, hey, actually, that's a misconception, or that's something that you thought was true but isn't actually. And that's something that can be useful at both the draft stage, which, you know, text is the main element of these books, the core that we build on. So it's good to have someone for the draft, but it's also good to have a sensitivity consultant in the same way that you have a visual editor at the very end of a project, just to kind of scan everything one last time and make sure that the images are okay. Or the accessibility is okay as well. Like, does your auto text reader for a PDF work? Are all of your images alt text tagged? That sort of stuff.
Thank you. So it's sensitivity readers definitely useful for anything where there may be some areas that could cause concern for people, and especially in this day and age where things seem to have a lot of issues about heritage. Which was previously known as race in some games. Sensitivity is also about looking at cultures. When if you're doing a historical role-playing game, there could be a big issue where you're dealing with something like swashbuckling in the Caribbean. That could actually trigger some people. So it's how you want. That's it. Thank you very much, Brian. That was amazing.
I think also just on that point, I think the other thing that needs to be looked at with some sensitivity is the artwork that we use in the books.
Most definitely.
I suspect that Morrison and I have both been through the period of the 80s with the chainmail bikinis. You know, they were all back then. A ludicrous.
I think it's wonderful that you think that that only happened in the 80s.
I'm hopeful.
Yeah.
To be fair, Kat, that's a very good point, because actually it came up today on my Twitter feed, and I looked at this picture with some sort of shock and surprise, thinking, have I gone back 20 years? Because this doesn't make any logical sense. This attire doesn't work on any level unless it's a nightclub, and even then I'm not so sure, you know. But going into combat, no. So I just think that it's useful sometimes. We can like artwork, you know, as a white male, I can like a particular piece of artwork and think that's perfectly fine. But it isn't a bad thing to have someone who's not me looking at it and going, actually, come on, let's think about this for a second. You know, it does help that I game with teenagers, so I'm very PG with everything. But you know, I've got art books. I've got art books by Frank Frazetta, a fabulous fantasy artist, of course. But would I show all those? I wouldn't use a lot of those images in the Frog. If I had access to them, I'd have to turn a lot of them down, because times have changed. So I think that sensitivity piece goes into the visual part very much, as well as the written text.
Yeah, I think representation is in art, like as you said, is just, it's something that we all have to be really, really aware of now. And it's just, there are so many different axes of representation that it's important to include, you know, like it's vital to have different body shapes, colors, sizes, you know, ability levels, like all of that is, you know, like you said, when you come from a position of privilege like we do, then it's difficult to know what it is you're not seeing, right? So that's the role of a sensitivity consultant, is to provide that additional viewpoint on what you're missing.
Thank you. And whilst you were talking, Kat, that was lovely. We have a wonderful Kelsey Dion up here.
Hey, I'm so sorry. There were 5 things that went wrong with me joining, but thank you for letting me in late. I'm really sorry, you guys.
We're so glad you came. It's all for a good cause, and we really appreciate your time, and we understand everyone has technical difficulties and there's time warping stuff and everything.
Oh gosh, well, thank you. Hi, everyone.
Hi there.
I do.
So we've talked so far about making an RPG or an adventure, and the text has been the beginning piece of things, and then we've talked about the artwork coming in. So, okay. Do you mind if we go back, everybody, just briefly, so that Kelsey could have input for how she produces stuff? Is that correct, pronoun?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, so were we talking about art and like procuring art and things like that, or?
We've gone back further for you, just so that you've caught up with everyone. It's how would you go about creating a product, or your creative process?
Oh, yeah.
Art.
Sure. Thank you for letting me jump in with this one. And I'm curious if this is the same for all of you, but a lot of times I get ideas that form out of just absorbing material that I like from other creators, whether it could even be fiction, nonfiction, you know, comics, video games, and that all kind of little ideas and inspirations from those sort of pool together for me. And then I think depending on the scope of a project someone wants to do, you sort of reach a critical mass where you say, oh, I have enough ideas that have come together to form something that would fit the scope of like an adventure, or, you know, a source book. If it's something huge, I guess that'd take a long time. But once that happens, I guess I kind of know that I have an idea that I want to run with, and it goes from idea phase to me needing to write down notes and a list and bullet points about an outline for what I might want to see, and then refine it from there based on pacing or, you know, how we want to organize the content. That's how I would go about it.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Kelsey. Another thing, like probably just kind of important, you know, like would you like to introduce yourself, please? How rude of me. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I'm the one who is rude showing up this late.
No, you're fine.
I'm Kelsey Dion from the Arcane Library, and I'm the sole operator of a very small publishing company that does primarily 5th edition D&D material.
Thank you very much, Kelsey. You're brilliant. You're welcome. Okay, so where we'd actually got was you've got something written, everybody, and you're looking, and Kelsey's actually put in something about artwork as well, and I know Kat and you've all contributed that about the artwork, because we discussed sensitivity readers being vital nowadays, especially. So you've got your written text. It's you feel pretty happy with it as a product, and you think it's going to be a go for making a cool product. Could be an adventure, could be a role-playing game, and so what would you do about getting the right artwork that inspires you or fits the bill? That's open to everyone.
Yeah.
I would say before you even touch artwork, you need to do graphic design and layout, which I think is something that Martin would be really good at talking about.
Yeah.
Martin, different.
Well, thanks for that, Brian. Yeah, I think you first need to set up where you're putting images into. One of the worst things that you could do is commission some illustrations and they're half the size you need them to be. They don't fit with what you're doing. So once you've got your module, your source book, you need to look at rough layouts on where everything's roughly going to go. Then you can look at how you're going to get that art. Again, we talked about having a group of people to show things to. That helps with getting an idea of different types of art you could use. They might suggest people. There's a number of different ways you can get that art. You can generate it yourself. You can contact illustrators and look for secondary artwork. A lot of people always think they've got to commission a piece. They must pay for this. Then there's a lot of artists out there who've got works that have been done, and they'll happily let them go for less than they cost to initially commission. And you can obviously put up a relationship with artists doing that as well. And I would say put your money, if you're going to spend your own money, put it in the best place, which is on the cover or on a couple of premium plates that you use throughout there, because your cover is really going to sell what you're doing to people. And that's important. And if you put up a relationship with various artists as well, get them involved, get them inspired. If you can sell your project to them and they're like, oh yeah, I love this, it's great, then you've got a good product, and they'll do some good work as well. As Brian said, really think about the how first. I mean, something else that hasn't been added to that list, I would say, is marketing and accounting and project management. It's dull, and I hate spreadsheets, but I now live in them, because it's not just how you're going to do it, it's how you're going to pay to do it. So that might be something Kat can pick up more on, but those are some serious considerations before you have the fun part. Do the preparation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like Martin said, like that's really, you almost need to take it back a couple of steps, right? Because that rough budgeting document should be like one of the first things you do kind of once you've got your, I mean, there's a strong argument that you could even do it before you start writing, but like, let's just assume for the time being that you can write in your spare time, and that's fine. But yeah, you need to understand what your budget is, how much you can spend on art, because that's going to determine how you source your artists, what kind of art you source, and specifically what rights and contractual relationships you have with artists. So like Martin said, if you're happy to settle for, sorry, I shouldn't say settle for, that's a terrible way of putting it. But if you're happy, if you see a piece of art done by an artist that you really, really like, and you can convince them to let you reuse that for your cover, and that's a fantastic way to stretch your budget to better art. If you've got a smaller budget, you can also look at things like if you do commission like a fantastic full color cover, and Warren's completely right, put the bulk of your budget into your cover, because that's going to be used everywhere. That's going to become the visual reference for your game. So it's going to be really, really important. It's going to set the tone and the branding for the game that you're producing. So yeah, put your money into the cover, and then you can, if you ask your artist to do a complex cover image in layers, you can extract different elements from that to use as graphical elements throughout the book. You can convert it into black and white, and then that adds a kind of a shade of difference. So again, if you commission one big, great piece of art, you can then reuse that throughout the book once you kind of get your artist's permission on it. And then in terms of like finding artists, I find Twitter is fantastic. There are some really great kind of Twitter threads. Like there's Drawing While Black, there's women artists threads, like fantasy artists, like hashtags, and they're all like, there are so many hashtags where artists are just throwing out their portfolios, saying whether they're available or not. Like they'll have their commissioning rates on there as well. So I think Twitter is like a really great place to go to find artists. And there, if you have literally zero budget, I think what a lot of indie designers are doing now is they're going to websites like unsplash.com, which is all copyright-free images. So looking at that, looking at Wikimedia images which are copyright-free or which you can use, which are Creative Commons. There's a lot of free artwork out there if you just do a Google for it, if your budget doesn't expand at all.
I wanted to pick up on that if I can and just add there's a couple more things you can do. What we used in nautical campaigns was just some stock images. We bought if you've got your theme, you've got your creative theme, that can spring you off on so many different directions. So just to fill out the design, we just bought, just for £10, just some vector images. Just of like simple nautical stuff like compasses, crabs, tridents, and you can manipulate those in Illustrator or some other vector thing, and just change the colors to match your design. And it's a really cheap way of just adding a little bit of color and flavor. If you're looking at, if you've got really low budget, look at book design in the 60s and 70s. That's, I wasn't alive then, just to underline that. But they had a similar constraints in terms of budget. They had to spend money on a good cover. They had color plates. The rest of it was woodcuts and making things stretch. So whilst we're in an environment where we've grown up looking at the most amazing paintings, you can't fill your book full of that. So look at ways that you can do that creatively. Again, maybe it's a few stock images that you use as silhouettes or something like that. So.
Well, you say you can't fill your book with paintings. I want to throw out a really cool role-playing game that's it's called Into the Bronze by Lantern's Fawn, and it's a Mesopotamian-themed rules-light role-playing game, and it uses all of this gorgeous, free, high-quality artwork, pictures of relics and paintings and pieces from Mesopotamia from free archives online. Many museums online have millions of very high quality work they just have available. And the only thing you need to do is get their free use license, which is, this is from here. The Getty Museum in the USA is one such place. Wikimedia is another one. I think the British Museum has its own like archives of like free images, because ultimately it's about sharing culture. And it is a gorgeous book. It's full of color. It's full of really interesting usage of the imagery, and all the images, as I understand it, are copyright and free. The only thing that they have paid for, in my understanding, might be a couple pieces of custom artwork and a font. And the rest of it has been, graphic design in InDesign or in a similar program, and free images. And it shows that there are a lot of really good sources out there. If you like woodcuts, there's also the Pictorial Archives series of books and digital things you can download, which are like 5,000 woodcuts of women, 5,000 woodcuts of men, 5,000 woodcuts of animals. And they will be dated, and there will be some very dated tropes in there as well. But you can collage digitally together some really interesting images using those Pictorial Archives.
It's worth, that was a great point about the Mesopotamian artwork. It's as I understand copyright law, and I've been encountered it several times, let's just go that way. If an image is older than 75 years, then you can use that. One of the reasons Monty Python used the animation they did was because they didn't want to pay artists. And they went out and they just bought paintings from shops and cut them up and made them. Let's use that same kind of ingenuity and genius Do check though. Do double check
yes.
your
Make sure that you're working from the right sources. But
And
museums tend to have some cool schemes.
yeah, absolutely. Fantastic stuff. I mean, NASA's got some fantastic free images out there. Beautiful stuff. So get creative.
One thing I'd like to say is that people should also not feel too pressured about having to produce something that is full color. You know, if you're working from, you know, your home kitchen table and you want to produce your first or your second or your third publication, there's nothing wrong with having one picture that's in color that goes on the cover, and then the rest of the artwork is something that you've sourced from these archival sources that is going to probably be black and white, might be more icons and symbols. As long as you have a nice layout, that's perfectly acceptable. You know, at the end of the day, we might be influenced to purchase because it's pretty, but what's more important is that the content is good. And I think it can be a barrier to entry when people see Wizards of the Coast and they see the fabulous books that have cost a huge sum of money to produce. You know, we are not going to equal them in terms of production value. You know, Kat, forgive me, maybe you can. I don't know, but I don't.
Not even remotely.
But I can do my best, and I can be creative. And as Brian and Martin say, that, you know, there are these resources online. Every pre-Raphaelite picture ever painted is available for use. You can't get better artwork than that. So with some thought, you can find amazing things, but also as long as you have a style, and if that style is all black and white cartoon pictures, okay, great. Because I was, you know, I've read 2000 AD, best-selling comic in the UK for years, and the bulk of that was black and white. So, you know, I just think it's a cautionary tale that people can be put off by it, and they don't have to be. You know, find a style, make it look nice, make it look consistent, and that'll be fine.
Your black and white can also help you down the line in production as well, because if you look at Amazon online, they charge less to put a book together if most of it's black and white. So you don't, as Stephen said, you don't need to go down that road. Another thing that there used to be used a bit, and I've seen it come back, is photographing minis. Just use your mini collection, set up dioramas, create using that. You know, do some photography.
And nowadays you can, if you take a couple of pictures of your minis and you run it through a few filters, actually it can look pretty good.
Yeah.
Kelsey, you got something there?
Well, sure. I mean, I think the most important thing, especially for me being like a super small publisher, is that you want to achieve consistency across your product line. So I think it really helps to think through, especially your first few products, really hard, like how much you want to invest in art and how you're going to procure that art so that you can achieve at least some consistency across future releases. Not to say that you can't go back and re-release things. I've actually done that. Like when I first started out, I was working on a smaller budget. So I had a lot of not lower quality, but less expensive stock art in my works. And then I was actually able to re-release some of my works later on and bring them up to a different sort of more colorful style that I had. And that, if anything, was just exciting for people. So there's some flexibility there, especially as you're growing and just starting out.
Thank you.
That can be a big draw for crowdfunding and Kickstarter. Like, do it with the free artwork, and then one of the things when you go to when you get bigger and you have a larger audience, say, hey, if you buy this, I can get custom stuff. I can support other people. We can do some cool things, and then people get very excited.
Yeah.
So for when you're producing something, you've got the artwork. You've actually got it to the point that you're thinking. You found your style, what you want to have. You've got to edit everything, and you've got to do your layout, and you've got obviously your graphic design, which you would, and it's not all a linear. It will be a holographic project as such, because you've got to look at, I presume, every single part consistently across from start to finish. So. If you've got the availability and the cost, you could actually do it in-house or outsource. What would you, if you had a complete carte blanche, what would you prefer to do, and what actually do you do?
If I had an unlimited budget, then
Hmm.
I'd be spending that on the artwork, because it's fundamentally, it's my weakest area of creativity. I can create some images and I can do maps and cartography, but frankly, there's better people out there. And I think when you create these things, it's good to play to your strengths. Ultimately, the feedback I get and my own personal feeling about it is that I'm a storyteller. So that's what I should focus my time on. A, doing, and B, getting better at. And then, and Brian makes a good point, when you do run Kickstarters, and we're going to talk about funding, I know, but they're a very good avenue to generate some extra funds that you can then go out to those people who specialize in doing artwork or specialize in graphic design. I think, personally, I think it's better to have a nice layout than it is to have great artwork. So if someone is sitting there thinking, okay, I want to produce something for this great genre of game that I love, but I'm a bit limited in my artwork and I'm a bit limited in my graphic design. Where do I put my funds? Well, make the layout and the format look great by paying someone to do that. I'm lucky that that's my background in many ways, so I don't have that challenge. But I think that trumps the artwork. I really do. And that can be down to something as simple as, and it goes to Kelsey's point of having a consistent font, having your headings the same size and the same layout in each publication. That doesn't cost anything, but it takes a certain creativity to devise, and it's worth paying someone to come up with that. And there's lots of options. You can go to fiverr.com, you can hire a graphic designer, probably somebody in this chat room would be willing to do it for a small fee.
Yes.
No, I'm talking. It's me. My but there's people out there who will do this, and I think it's worth paying for that. And then secondary to it, not because of importance, but just I think the secondary thing then would be the artwork. And everything else, I think, is on me in many ways. Oh, I'm sorry, I do a disservice to my editor when I say that. Jane Spencer, I apologize. The editing cannot be done by the person who creates the content. It cannot be done, I'm sorry, but that's an absolute rule. Whether it's your best friend, whether it's your mother, whether it's your wife, you need somebody else to read through your material, because there will be mistakes. Absolutely. So editing is critical. Editing is a necessity, though. It's not if I had all the money in the world. It's just, you just need to have another person. That's fundamental. You have to do that. If you don't, you're an amateur.
Yeah, to underline what Stephen was saying, as a graphic designer, I'm obviously going to say this, but you're communicating information. And one of the things we get sidelined by is all these amazing pictures. And particularly in role-playing games, it's a system you're communicating as well, which is very difficult to understand. And years ago, when there were only a few role-playing games, you spent the time to read that and you learnt it. But now there's so many out there that if somebody can pick up your game and understand what's going on, and the editing and the layout's kind of like the bass player of the group of the book, as it were. Like, you don't really notice them, but if they're not there, it all goes to hell, and it all falls apart. So that's where I put it there. And as Stephen said, if you're going to work with somebody else, try and find somebody who complements what you do and does what you don't do very, very, very well.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think that each of us are doing this because we each have a particular talent in one aspect of, or I mean, we love writing, for example, or we love layout. So I think if I had all the money in the world, I would be dumping the money into a talent that I don't have, which would be art or something like that, So I think it's interesting that you ask that too, because I think there is a point of diminishing return where you actually get a product to a point where it's okay, and like more budget necessarily that wouldn't strictly make it better at that point. Like, you're going to get art that's good enough, and then anything more than that might be a little over the top, for example. So it's funny that people ask that, because I actually think it's easier to, I almost think it's easier to work on a budget sometimes than it is to have free reign and then make a project become so outside of the scope of what you were planning on that it could be crazy. So yeah.
Thank you. That's it's interesting with how everything's going in, that we're jumping it across we'll get to the money side of things and the process in a bit, because these are all important. Everything's important from, and as you say, Stephen, with the having a second set of eyes as an editor is essential. I presume that includes proofreading as well.
It does. Now, it was something that I learned from my editor, that was actually considered a separate stage of the process, which was quite a surprise to me, to be honest. But you know, the books I produce will go through an editing process. I get them back, I refine them, I polish them, and then they get looked at again. And it's amazing what gets discovered. I think it was Brian who mentioned that, you know, you have a visual editor, then you have someone who actually just steps back and looks at the design and the pictures, and is everything orientated the right way. And I think the more seriously you do this for a living, the more seriously you have to take it, and that means you have to put in these extra steps. You know, anyone can publish a supplement for a role-play game system, but not anyone can do it for a living. And I think there's a big difference between the two things. And in some ways, people need to make a decision about how seriously they're taking this. Is this for fun? Is this a weekend football match? Okay, that's great. We'll do it on that level. But are you trying to get to the Premier League? That's different. And that requires a different process and a different discipline. You know, it requires a file structure on your hard drive where you archive everything and you can access all your documents. You know, Kat mentioned being able to go back to things that you had started on ages ago, but you have to be able to find them. You know, if you don't have a good filing system, that beautiful piece of fiction that you wrote is gone for good. So there are other steps that you have to include, such as you say, the proofreading side of it, which is critical.
Yeah, I think that absolutely, like that goes back to what I was kind of saying earlier about like deciding why you're doing this. Like, are you doing this because you want to be an RPG designer, or are you doing this because you want to be an RPG publisher, or are you doing this because it's a fun way to spend the next couple of months? You know, and each of those decisions, like Stephen said, will massively influence and drive the process that you undertake to get to a finished product. Yeah, so developmental. So actually, I want to go back like another step, because I kind of feel like we haven't really touched on playtesting very much, and I think that's much earlier in the process than we're kind of at so far. So just as we're talking about editing and refining, I wanted to bring up playtesting, because honestly, I'm now at the point where I can tell how much playtesting a game has by reading it. I'm like, yep, because there's two fundamental things about playtesting that I think people miss. Like, people understand that they need to playtest their product, whether it's a supplement or an adventure or a standalone RPG, and they run it for people, and it goes really well, and they're like, great, it's playtested, perfect. But there's a really important second step, and that second step is handing it to somebody who has not played it with you and sitting there watching them run it silently and take notes, right? Because that is the only way to understand how well you've communicated what you want your game to be, right? Is just by having it, what I would kind of call externally playtested. And again, it's key that it's externally playtested by people who have not played it with you, because there's a really, really famous story game designer who I know is only getting people who have played their games with them to run them and playtest them, because if you actually pick them up without any context, they're very difficult to run and play. So it's really vital that you make sure that somebody who is not you and has not experienced you running it, right, is literally just picking it up from the actual text and can run the game that you want to, that you're kind of aiming for, like, and deliver the kind of experience that you want players and GMs to have with your game. So yeah, playtesting, I think it comes before any of the kind of the developmental editing stages, or any of the copy editing stages, or any of the layout, anything like that. It needs to be really robustly playtested, I think, long before that.
I think there's an opportunity there as well to make a little bit of money. You can release something that you're doing as a small PDF that is just simply written and get it play tested by people who will perhaps purchase it for $2 and you'll make a little bit of money to add into the production, and you'll get your play testing done by, as Kat said, a group of people who you don't know and aren't trying to impress you. And that's an important thing to do.
Kat, you're obviously prescient, because I was going to go on to playtesting next, so that's fantastic. Thank you.
Just want to add a quick, tiny point to the whole conversation about the different roles. I saw a question about, someone asked on Twitter this week about what the role of, like, say, how does a game designer, how are they related to, say, advertising a game? When you're working as a small publisher, we wear so many hats. I mean, as Kat was saying, you started doing InDesign even though you came in from like a management and convention side of things. You're a writer, you're a designer, you're sometimes an illustrator, you're the marketer, you are working in the physical distribution side of things. These are separate roles. And as you get to larger production, those roles will fill out to other people because they can be entirely all-encompassing. So just being aware that there's a lot of different facets to work on, and you won't get all of them at once, and you might find that you're not so great at some of them, and that's why if you have the infinite budget in the world, you'd love to just hire someone else to take care of it because you might not be good at it, but there are other people who are. But yeah, don't feel awful if you don't get everything, because there is a lot to take on. Yeah.
Yeah, each of those aspects, as Brian said, is a professional role. It's a full-time job that people are doing professionally. It's just that one individual aspect of it. And, you know, as a small business owner, like you are having to do a passable attempt at multiple really professional jobs. Yeah.
Well, I think it's good to remember that, and it's good to be kind to yourself and actually sort of pat yourself on the back a little bit and go, you know what, I'm actually not an artist, but you know what, that's a new picture that I created. So yeah, it's okay. That'll do. I can put that in there. You know, we sometimes hold ourselves to too high a standard, and that can be soul destroying. You know, let's give ourselves some credit for what we're actually doing. At the end of the day, we start with one wee idea in a notebook and we end up with a product that someone can play. That's incredible. That is incredible. And we should really, you know, we should love ourselves a little bit for that. Just a little bit, you know, but we should.
So let's go on to the process. And I believe we've actually discussed this quite a bit already. It's how important is the look and layout of RPG products. And it's and getting to the stage where you're happy with the end results. Well,
I mean, I think we have talked about this, and I think layout is really king. I think that's what we're saying here. Yeah. But if there's one thing that I've learned, and it's an odd little experience, and hopefully it has some merit to people watching this, but make sure that your cover is absolutely mind-blowing. And here's the test. Here's the question you have to consider. Can you look at that same cover every single day for 3 months? Because when you start to market it, oh Lord, it's going to be on your Twitter feed, on your Facebook, your Discord group. And if it's not right, you're going to notice it. After a couple of days, you're going to think, oh my God, why did I pick that? Why is the text white? It should have been gold. It should have been something else. So have it there. Put it on your desk, print it out, stick it on a notice board, wherever. Make sure you love it, because you're going to see it a lot. And it's
super, super great point. And another thing that I would add to that is make sure that, as well as it looking great full size, when you shrink it down to a tiny little thumbnail, that has to look just as grabby, because often that's all people are going to see on like a big screen with multiple different covers, right? So as well as looking good full size, it has to look good when you shrink it right down to like 25% of the size.
And very importantly, if you look at the picture, if you find yourself having to explain any aspect of the picture, of the cover, to somebody else, it's wrong. Because your audience it's the playtesting point that Kat made. They're not going to be able to have your explanation. They only have that little thumbnail. So it's got to be absolutely right out of the box.
Yeah, and I think too, part of that is, especially when you're someone wearing many hats and you're like, do I even know enough about art to decide whether I have a good cover, which is something I faced as a challenge. One thing you can do is, I mean, would you be proud of your cover being next to other publishers at your same level, or people who you know it's going to be showing up alongside? You know, could it at least not be an embarrassment next to other people's work? That's a big litmus test for me.
I think a point about artwork that I've just thought of that's kind of alongside the look, the feel of the book. I think when you haven't got a background in art, you think that it's just pretty on the page and looks really cool. But a cool key thing for artwork is that it is enhancing the text, not illustrating the text. So if you've got a passage about sword fighting, unless it's directly relevant that they are using rapiers and are rapier fighting, maybe the fight scene could be something else. It brings an extra element of story or flavor to the rules that you're illustrating. If it's directly saying what's on the page, like it's literally one for one, just the image of what the text is describing, it's not going to bring anyone further into the story. As Kat was saying, you're balancing writing concise rules that people can understand and cool flavor that brings them into the world, that makes them feel cool for playing the game. That's what images can do. They can help you lower the amount of actual text they have to read and reference, because they look at the image and they see people fighting in a market and they go, oh, that's really cool. This game's about fighting in marketplaces. And they read the rules and it's like, roll D6 and on a 6, you hit the person. On a 5, you hit a chicken. Like, the rules are there, concise. The artwork is there telling all of the story. They work together. They aren't the same replicated.
I think Brian makes a very good point there. One thing to be very wary of if you're doing your own artwork is not to love it too much that you lose sight of what you're communicating, because it's there to do a job. And sometimes you have to work with things that you don't like necessarily. But as Brian said, going back to my music analogy, it's the text is like a vocalist, and the images are like a guitarist. They're adding flavor and color. And unless you're used to listening to some kind of mad jazz, then those have got to work it together and sort of tell your audience what it's about. And it's about things doing their job. Like, you can get far too close to your own work. And as Kelsey said, you don't want to have your cover look an embarrassment against others because you've got really precious about it and you really like that because you really like that picture. Does it do the job, as Kat said? Does it, in a thumbnail, tell people what you're about and make them want to buy it?
Okay, thank you. Let's talk about money. It's important because you need it to begin with, and you're not producing it. Well, you could be producing it for love, but really, if you want a living, you want to do it for the money. So, how do we get funding? And how do we budget? Ooh.
But can I make one point before anybody else goes in? I think the main thing people forget sometimes is factor in profit, or decide if you're doing this for love and you don't mind not making a profit, and build yourself in a little bit of barrier so you don't lose money. But again, it goes back to, as Kat said, understanding why you're doing this. But always look at a profit margin, because you need to put that into the next project, or you need to live if you're going to do this for any kind of sustenance or business idea. But in terms of the different sources we've looked at there, you can look at Kickstarter, you can look at building an audience via Patreon yourself and then funding it yourself. As Stephen said earlier, you can get something together, then take it to Kickstarter and then get funding. That's what it's for. It's for independent people to get funding for these things. I would be very worried if somebody said, I'm going to put several $1,000s into this of my own money. If you've got it to throw around, then great. But I would, again, go slowly into it. But also look for business partners as well. One of the things I've found in the recent months is that working with other people, if there is a project that two of you can share the cost and the risk, then that's better. You can actually achieve much more, and it's a lot less scary.
I think you can start quite inexpensively, and of course it does depend where you want to end up. If you're trying to pay the bills, it's a little bit different. You have to run a little bit faster, but you can go on to Drive-Thru-RPG, you can go on to the DM's Guild. Although the problem with that is you lose the IP of anything you produce, so there's a big question mark with that. But you can start quite small, produce small supplements, charge a couple of dollars for them, and the money will accrue. But if you're going to try and make some serious money, I do think that you need to go to in my personal experience, Kickstarter has been the only avenue where I've actually had what I would class as real money back. My first Kickstarter made me, which was a modest achievement, but it made me the equivalent of a year and a half's earning from Drive-Thru RPG. So you think year and a half or 3 weeks, and you know the two things aren't comparable. So Kickstarter there is a market for RPG material that's baked in quite hardcore into Kickstarter itself. Plus, if you then market it out to your own network, you know that's a viable path to go. I mean, my personal history was that I spent the 3 years selling the small supplements, built up enough to cover the expenses of going to a couple of face-to-face gaming shows. Started to sell there, started to get in touch directly with the purchasers, talk about the material in more detail, and then beginning of this year or May, launched the first Kickstarter, and that was the costs for all of that came about from those smaller publications. So you can do it gradually, you can build it, or if you have some money, as Martin suggests, you know, you can then cover those minimal costs really, and I would say go straight to Kickstarter, but do your research, learn how to use that platform. Don't just think, I'm just going to put it on there and press launch and it'll make me thousands. It doesn't work like that. It's blooming hard work, quite frankly, and you can do it. I've done 4 since May, and I think I'm getting a little bit better at it with some good advice from some friends and a consultant who specializes in Kickstarter. But you can do it better and you can do it worse. So there's things to be learned.
Yeah, I agree so much with Stephen, the idea of like moving gradually towards larger things, because there's tons of ways that you could fund projects, but I think the way that I started out was by doing a small budget, smaller project, and then coming to this with the mindset that although this is my first thing, I do want to do this as my job someday. So I came out the gate using those smaller projects as a way to build the business and reinvest back into it. So that's kind of a way you can grow incrementally. And you get to a point where you can sort of estimate how much return on investment you'll get initially from a project based on the size of your core audience. So as you grow your audience, you're growing your abilities and margins and the amount of money you'll have to reinvest into the next project and pay yourself. So I think Kickstarter is a way to get funding on a big, ambitious project right away, but you can go like a slow growth method too.
I'd agree. And I'd say if you're starting from completely no budget and also maybe no experience, so it's not like you've got a set of professional tools from a job you already have. If you're coming into this and it's just purely passion and love for role-playing games, I would use any return to invest back into developing the tools and the skills that you have, but I wouldn't invest in the sense of, buying all these expensive things, because ultimately you don't know if you need that. You don't know how to use it if you're inexperienced. If you make £10 on Patreon or you make 50 quid in sales of your PDFs, that means great, I can get InDesign for a couple months and I can play around with that and make some cooler stuff and get some experience. Or I can, to be honest, there's a lot of expectation. You don't even have to get InDesign. You can get other, I think there's like Affinity, there's other design programs or free ones. You can work with, I will get one nice cover done for my PDF and then that'll be really cool and that will get me a little bit more money. And don't focus at first on huge amounts of money or, £10,000 Kickstarters. It's the small growth and not over budgeting past that.
It's similar in a way of, as we talked about with the creative process, don't just start doing it and start small and keep working at it. Because if you look at the whole thing, you might get a bit blinded. But in the same way, just go into it slowly and build up.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I totally agree with what everyone else has said. And again, it does come back to what your end goal is. Do you want this to be your job? Or do you want to be able to go to a con with your games and go, hey, look, I made these games, aren't I great, kind of thing. And that, again, I've already said this, but that does determine the course that you need to take and what you need to be focusing on. Budget's really important to have in advance. There is a guy called Jeff Tidball has done publishing your RPG budget. It's like an Excel template. It's out there. There's a load of really great resources. Brian, you can mention your thing later.
Ooh, there was a cool thing I saw on Twitter, which is the TTRPG. Well, you said it. Now I forgot what it's called. Someone else Googled it.
Resources Jam.
There we go.
TTRPG
Yes.
Resources Jam.
Yeah. TTRPG Resources Jam. Thank you very much, Kat. Names out of my head. But it's a full collection of free or very cheap resources about publishing in all the aspects. Mm-hmm. So not just videos like we're doing, but like full documents and Excel spreadsheets and cool things going on about like doing your taxes and what is a print run and organizing things stock-wise, like aspects that you don't think of when you think of like a fancy book.
Yeah, so I think that ties into something else I was going to add to the kind of business and money discussion, which is another key decision that you can make at most stages, I think, is whether you want it to be a digital product or a print product, right? So I say this in pretty much every panel I'm on at the moment, but the barriers to entry for designing and publishing your own RPG have never been lower than they are right now, right? You can do something for literally no budget. You can put it up on Drive-Thru-RPG, you can put it up on itch.io, and you can even use with things like the DM's Guild and other community content, you can take the actual layout templates from companies and just use their artwork, use their assets, and just publish a thing, right? But if you want to go down the digital only route, you don't need much of a budget starting off. And then there's a kind of two aspects to the print route, which are print on demand and investing in a print run. Print on demand, again, has made it easy to have actual physical copies of your book, because you can just go to somewhere like Drive-Thru-RPG has a print on demand service, Lightning Source. There's quite a few different print on demand options out there, and they can basically take your PDF and just print it. So you can then go to a convention, you can sell copies of your print book. If you want to invest in a print run, that's where you need to start, as Stephen was saying, that's where you need to start looking at a bit of serious capital investment into your company and into your game. Kickstarter is a great one. Again, somebody else has already said it, but it's so true. Kickstarter is not, you can't just put your game up on Kickstarter and sit there and wait for all the cash to roll in, right? You need to bring your own audience to Kickstarter. And that's the thing that I think a lot of people starting out don't understand, is that Kickstarter will do some of the work for you in terms of bringing eyeballs to look at your RPG, but fundamentally you're going to be tapping into your own existing audience. And so you have to, as Kelsey was saying, you have to have been building that audience over time, right? You cannot just tomorrow publish an RPG out of nowhere and expect people to buy it, right? You need to have been on social media talking about games, showing people what you're working on, and building your brand and building your connections with other people in RPGs. It's a very, very small industry. It's very word of mouth driven. You can do very, very well just by being really active on Twitter, on like Tabletop RPG Twitter, and also by taking part in game jams on itch.io. That helps you to build your community, build the people that you know, build the people who are interested in and invested in what you're doing. And then, as Kelsey mentioned, only then once you've kind of created and developed and cultivated that audience, can you then go to something like Kickstarter and say, I'm going to try doing a print book. And I thought Kelsey's point earlier about the playtest version, right? Doing a kind of an ashcan first, releasing it for a couple of dollars, and then saying, hey, if you like this, I'm now going to kickstart an actual print version, whether that's black and white or color. And it's kind of, people are excited because they feel like they've been part of that process with you. They were in there on the ground floor, like they knew you before you were big and doing print books, and people really like that story of your development as a designer. And it's a big part of how you can monetize that and how you can grow what you're doing into more of a commercial business.
Sorry, go ahead, Brian.
Well, I was going to add, there's lovely pros and cons to doing digital and physical. And I'd say digital is the best way to start because it's so easy to update. If you make a mistake, if there's spelling, if you don't have all of those hats quite right, you can easily just publish an update. You can make changes. And everything's all fresh. And what's even better is when someone signs up, normally downloading it from a website, they buy it off of itch.io, even if it's like, pay what you want for free. Whenever you update it, they get an update. Literally an email that says, oh, hey, there's more updates for the thing that you bought. And they'll come back and they'll look at your stuff and they'll remember that you exist. And it helps build your audience that way, just through updates. Now, it's just much better that way. If you are printing physically, if there's even one typo, you now have 500 or 1,000 books with that typo in, and you can't change that.
I had an interesting experience with my first 2 Kickstarters that I ran in May and June, and that was that I had backers in both of those asking me for physical products. Now, at the time, I was still designing and laying out everything in Word, and I wasn't confident that what I had managed to sort of bully Word into producing was actually going to hold up once you stuck it through a printer. I knew it was fine as a digital file, but that printing side, so I said no. I said, look, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to do it. And then on the 3rd Kickstarter, I very tentatively offered some printed postcards as a supplement to the adventure to try and sort of appease the audience that were asking for this thing. And now my 4th Kickstarter is actually for a physical book. I'm going straight from not digital to hardback. Hey, sometimes you got to jump in. I think it's good to, I'm glad that I held my ground, and I'm glad I actually said no to backers and said, look, I'm sorry, but with regret, I'm not going to do that because I'm not ready, and I don't want to give you a substandard product because I didn't know something from a technical perspective. So it's important that people aren't pushed past the point that they're ready, and that you go at a steady pace, learning each of these things as you go along. And if the audience wants something fabulous, then please come back for the next one, which I'll try and do in the format that you want. But right now, what I'm going to give you is X. And I'm going to make X the best that I can do. And I think that's better than rushing ahead and going, okay, I'll give you X plus Y because you asked nicely, and I can make 10 quid. But actually, if that 10 quid then means you've got a substandard product, that's your reputation, and that's not good. So I think, go at the pace that you're planning and stick to what you know you can produce effectively.
Yeah, to underline what Brian and Stephen have just said, as somebody who's produced over 100 magazines and over 20 conferences, I had my nerves removed in about the year 2000. It's terrifying going sometimes to print. Again, you make one mistake, it's got to be bang on. You might get a 2nd edition, but you don't want to make a mistake. But it's a big gap. But if you want to do it, there's a distinction between digital and physical print that you should perhaps understand. Digital is for short run. Again, you can update that so your next runs can be changed and your artwork can be changed, but you'll get a better cost by going to high run litho print. In order to send stuff to that, you need to have it set up correctly. A lot of the printers these days are based in other countries. At the moment, we're looking at sourcing from Turkey for litho printing. We're looking at digital printers can print in the country you want it to be delivered, so that can be one good thing. But if you're sending artwork to a printer, particularly one that might not speak your language, that's another barrier. So you just have to be doubly aware of that. You don't want your big Kickstarter to fall down. And as Stephen said, get there with what you're comfortable doing and what you've got the budget to do. But we are in an industry that loves books and loves hardback books, and we all love them and we all want them and we all want to sit there. As much as the digital editions are nice, I do like sitting surrounded by my rule books. So it's the concern to go forward. Yeah.
Reminded me of I ran my Kickstarter in the red for the first proper publisher book last year, and when you're getting quotes and when you're budgeting, get a primary quote, get a backup from a different company, get a backup to that backup, then add 10%.
Get 3 quotes.
I had because of COVID. But I mean, it could be expected in general life, but especially because of everything that's going on, I have had different printers and producers fall through for pretty much every single award except the book itself. And even then, that was a real ordeal to organize and make sure that we had somewhere to ship it for storage. And I didn't have 3 quotes because I'd not done this before, I was like, oh, one quote will do. They said they wanted to work with me. It's fine. And then after the Kickstarter, and I have all this money and I've made all these promises, suddenly they disappear and there's me sweating.
Wow.
It's very important to budget very conservatively. And as Steve and other people are saying, what you can do very securely, that you're very comfortable doing, and that you've got backups for that so that you can fulfill.
Yeah, and there's interesting options like warehousing. There are companies that offer warehousing options where, so if you're going to go digital printing, you might as well order 1,000 copies. 1,000 copies is going to be a minimum really for litho. But if you're going to go digital printing for 500 copies, you might as well order 1,000 litho. You probably get them the same price, and then you can warehouse them and then you can sell them after. Again, also be aware that if you're kickstarting, you're creating a product. So people expect to be able to buy that afterwards. And how do you service those customers? I mean, there's a lot in it at the higher levels when you get to that, when you get to actual product, physical product. So again, as has been underlined, maybe start off digital, get your feet wet, build your audience, and then you can do some testers and move on from there.
Yeah, like our business model is actually based around retail distribution. So we do really large offset print runs that we then work with a distributor in the US to distribute to game stores. And that's kind of how we, that's how we keep our costs down, because we're printing such massive numbers. And it's, and that's one business model for your company, is you can go down that having your game in game shops route, but that's very difficult for like a one-person company to get into straight off the bat, right? So again, there are different models, there are different ways of financing and producing your books once you get to that print book stage. We've just lost somebody.
Okay, please come back.
Even.
I know.
Okay, thank you very much for this so far. We covered digital and physical. And I think for a final, if we could, I know we've explored marketing to a certain extent. Can we have some final points on marketing as well, please? Because it is essential as well.
Yeah, I think marketing it's interesting that we were just talking about digital versus physical, and that actually in my case blends very strongly into marketing, because I do mostly digital products, and part of that is because of the ability to market and build an audience with digital products so fluidly. So I honestly think that marketing is the most important part to business, besides writing good products. And especially people who are starting small, if they're doing digital, it's an excellent opportunity to build your own audience. And if I were to suggest anything to anyone starting out, do your best to keep your audience. So beyond just Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and what's that one that's going away? TikTok, because they can go away. So at least in my case, building a mailing list, like a newsletter, has been very instrumental. And using digital products to power that growth has also been what's allowed me to build my business over the last couple of years. So that's a big one.
My tip for like marketing, I find social media can be really draining, and my energy levels emotionally can really fluctuate between like working on projects and then dealing with like life stuff, and then, physically like boxing up stuff and sending it away. I like to use scheduling services like Bufferly or Hootsuite, and I plan out just some basic posts that images, like maybe 3 or 4 days out of the week, and I do a month of those, and then I know that I have content coming out. I'll spend all my energy in one day planning all of that, and then I have time to react to things, and I can shift them really easily by going onto Hootsuite and moving a post, or like, doing it twice in a day because, luxury. But having the nice basic amount of like stuff coming out can be really good just for the mental health, because then you can take away from social media. You can be like, right, I know it's happening, and I can focus on what I'm doing, and I can know that my audience is still seeing things that I'm doing.
Yeah, I think that's super important. I also use scheduling tools for all of our social media, and I've got a kind of a social media calendar that I kind of map what I'm posting and where, and I have it all set up, and I do that in one big block. But coming back to like Kelsey's point about building your own like one of the key things is to control your audience, right? That sounds much harsher than the way Kelsey said it, but she's totally right in that, like, you know, if you build a massive following on Twitter or a massive following on Facebook and anything happens with either of those platforms, you have just entirely lost your audience. So we have our own website, which I think is super important. Once you get beyond the kind of one or two products, having like a home on the internet that people can go to read more about your products, about your company, about what you're doing, I think is really, really important. And a connected mailing list, as Kelsey said, because that way you know that whatever else happens in the world, you know, your customers are coming to your website, you know, you have their email addresses, you're contacting them directly, and you're not dependent on another platform to grow your audience and to communicate with your audience. So social media is important, and it is a great way of advertising what you're doing to new people and to new audiences. But yeah, like keeping your existing audience, you know, connecting with them, reaching out to them. And, you know, and this is like, I guess the RPG industry is really different from other industries that might be doing marketing, in that, like I said earlier, it's a lot about word of mouth, but it's a lot about personal connection, right? You know, people, and especially if you're a smaller publisher, you as a person become very inextricably linked with your games and your products. And, you know, so that's kind of, there is a whole, you know, the social media aspect then becomes, I've kind of lost the run of where I was going with it, actually. But yeah, so it's just kind of, it's important to market and brand yourself and your games and control your own audience, like be able to make the connection is where I was going with it, actually. It's like, you have to connect as a human, right? You can't just be like, I am a giant RPG corporation, because nobody, you know, none of us want that. We want to know who you are, what your story is, you know, where you started, where you've come from, what you're doing now, and what you're doing next, right? That's, you know, we're interested in the people behind the games as well. So yeah, so I think it's really important to kind of incorporate all of that element into the marketing and the advertising that you're doing.
I think for me, social media, I used to train salespeople a lot. And one of the things that I used to be hired by companies who said, how can you make our salespeople better? Give us one tip and we'll see, you know, based on that tip, we may or may not hire you for the rest of your advice. And I'd say, okay, here's my one piece of advice. Turn their emails off. Simple as that. Turn their emails off, because they've got nothing else to do then apart from making sales calls. And it's the same sort of concept when it comes to being an RPG content producer and social media. If you want to produce more content, turn your social media off. You know, have a serious chunk of the day, have half of the day, every day, where it's turned off. And that means putting your phone away. It means you turn off all the streams that can come through. That way you can actually write or draw or create, whatever it is. You can't do both. That's a fallacy. So turn it off, remove that distraction, and produce. And if you go back to books on how to be an author, written back in the 1920s, they used to talk about turning the radio off. They would talk about secluding yourself in a room where no one can come and talk to you. Well, good Lord, we've got how many millions of people through the internet if we want to. So you have to remove those temptations and give yourself the time to actually create. Otherwise, that audience that loves you, well, they're going to find that you've run dry because you spent all your time chatting with them. You haven't actually done any work. So you have to make time for it. So turn off your emails, turn off the social media at certain times. And as Kat and I think a couple of you said, schedule your posts, schedule things, and then yes, go on and interact a wee bit here and there, but have those golden hours, as we used to say in sales, have the golden hours where you are doing what ultimately you will be paid to do, which is produce.
Yeah, to jump, I just want to build on that because it reminded me so strongly of something someone told me once, that the only way to have a profitable and successful business is to combine product with marketing, and anything that falls too far outside those two windows is something that you should deprioritize. I mean, not ignore, but deprioritize. Yeah,
I think that's super true. And my have never worked in marketing officially, but it's one of my many, many hats, like in my current role, because I kind of do a bit of everything. And my number one thing, if I had like one tip, and I say this because it's a bit of a bone of contention for me, is to understand, as well as like, you know, being able to cultivate and control your audience, understand your audience as well. And by that, I mean, look at analytics, right? Get Google Analytics for your website. Understand how people are getting to your website, where they're finding you, where they're spending time on your website, you know, what they're looking at, what they're interested in, where they're going to afterwards, whether if you have a web store on your website, and I absolutely think you should, because it seems like a really interesting, but a really easy way of making additional sales, as well as being on Itch or on Drive-Thru or whatever. Like understanding where in the sales process they're falling down, like, and similarly on social media, like Facebook has really good analytics, Twitter has good analytics. Like, look at those analytics, understand when the people are coming, when they want to see content, what kind of content they're engaging with, what they're liking, what they're commenting on, all of that kind of things. So analytics are, like, all of your marketing is useless unless you're looking at the analytics behind that marketing and what is happening as a result of your marketing.
I'd love to step in just on that point there. I discovered recently that I actually get quite a lot of people coming from Reddit to my website, which was a complete and utter shock to me, because I get no responses on Reddit itself, but people are reading things and then following a link through. So without those analytics, you're actually kidding yourself. You think that you know where stuff's coming from, but you don't. So it's a huge point now from you, Kat. Yeah.
Yeah, knowledge is power in that, and also turning it into a conversation as well with your market. You can start a Discord server. You can have your own. We talked earlier about sensitivity. Have your own group of people to talk to about your content, and then you can further understand who's coming to you. And I hate to use the term sales funnel, but that's what social media is. It's a funnel, and if you understand the aspects of that funnel and how it works, people will come to your website. As Kat said, do you want to pay a huge percentage to some people? It's great, but you can have a bigger percentage for yourself, and then you can have your market. In terms of Kickstarting, I just wanted to add, if people are out there thinking of going to Kickstarter, generally you want to be thinking about 6 to 10% of your ultimate revenue is what you want to spend on marketing. If you're doing tight marketing, that can go up to 15 to 20% if you're doing broad-based marketing. So again, we go back right to the beginning. We're starting thinking about writing your adventure, your module, your expansion, whatever you're doing. Think about that section of it if you're going to go that far with it. And yes, marketing is incredibly important, because it's nice to do a product for yourself, but you want to sell it to people and have other people understand it and enjoy it.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. I personally would love to just continue talking to you, and I could probably talk to you for hours, but you've got lives to do and everything. And so what I'd like to do is offer you an opportunity to make a shout out to any creators that you've worked with that you want to. And we'll put a link in with the video description at the end.
Okay, if I can give a shout out to my editor, Jane Spencer. Jane is an absolutely wonderful woman. She's funny, she's snarky, she tells me off when she needs to, and best of all, she's a gamer, so she's one of us. And she's a qualified professional editor and proofreader. She's got certificates. She's based down in south somewhere. I forgive her for that. That's okay. Says the Scot living in Yorkshire. But she's absolutely great. I'll have to send you the link for her, but I would not want to release anything that she has not edited now. That's how I feel about it. I'm even uncomfortable blogging now, where she doesn't see the blogs. I just put them out there, and I just know they're wrong. But she's absolutely fabulous. So that's my shout out.
I would do the same. I would shout out to my editor, V Huntsman, who is just incredible. I mean, when you find an editor who works with the style that you're going for, they just make everything better, and it's a very, very nice relationship. Yeah, V is fantastic at taking what I think is really concise, and I'm really proud of it, and I'm really happy. And they're good at, first of all, reading it and understanding everything that I want to do, and then like cutting it in half and throwing it away. So it's really lovely. I'd also shout out to two illustrators I work with. I have a live show, Beast Fables, which is every Wednesday, and I play with Ver and with Atlanta, and they're two illustrators who do a lot of artwork, and art really needs to be appreciated for just how nice it is to look at something with your covers, for your spreads. So I want to shout out that they're two lovely illustrators that I work and play with.
I'm gonna give a shout out to somebody who I would find it very difficult to do what I do right now without, which is our one of our main layout designers, and that's Jen Mccleary. And she has a website where she sells some of her art, and she does like wonderful mixed media, multimedia kind of collage artwork as well. And she's got things for sale and stuff on that. But her layout design is spectacular. She's a consummate professional. Her communication is great. She always hits her deadlines, and she is just brilliant at like anything. You know, I always feel like a layout artist is right at the, you know, you have all the time in the world to write, and then you have a bit less time for art, and then by the time you get to layout, you're right up against your deadline. So the layout artists are usually the people who get kind of the, hey, can you turn this around in a week, kind of panic emails from me. And she always rolls with that, and she's just such a, honestly, her work is so good. It's really, really great.
Gosh, can I do a shout out to my fiance, and she's going to be my wife in 2 days, Jessie.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yay.
That's partly why I was late coming on here.
awesome.
Totally. Like, we need the flowers, and I was like, what time is it? She's a brilliant artist, and she's been sort of my second pair of eyes on everything relating to art that I've done, and she was the one who kind of gave me encouragement from the start that I could really put products together and make them look good with her help. So I would be nowhere without her, and she is the second invisible half of everything that I do that never gets enough credit. So she's right there.
Hey.
Okay.
I'm going to give a shout out to Guy, Great Games Master, who started me on this crazy journey. If look at his channel, I'll be involved in a lot of stuff that's going on there. And yeah, just somebody rekindled my love of role playing and following your passions, which is what I think it's all about.
Well said.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. I'd like to give thanks to our guests. And as a reminder, this video is for the online charity role-playing convention, AlbaCon, and it's being held on the 3rd and 4th of October. All monies can be raised will go to It's Good to Give, who provide amazing support to young cancer patients and their families. Find out more on www.albacon.co.uk. Okay, everyone would like to say goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
You've been amazing.
Bye.
Been great, guys.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Thanks, Now. That was brilliant. Thank you very much.